Somewhere in South Africa right now, there's an animal worth more per pound than gold, more than cocaine, more than almost anything else on the black market. It's not a jewel, it's a horn. Sitting on a table in a room, in a house, in a neighborhood, in a city, in a country, in Africa, not a designer drug. It's a horn sitting on the face of a 2-ton grass-eating mammal that's been walking this planet for millions of years, the rhinoceros. Here's what's strange. Humans have farmed, hunted, and eaten almost every large plant-eating mammal we've ever come across. Cows, pigs, goats, even the occasional hippo almost made it onto American dinner tables. But the rhino, despite being hunted more aggressively than almost any land animal in modern history, almost nobody has ever eaten one on purpose. We've driven rhinos to the edge of extinction, we've paid criminal networks more money for a single horn than most people make in a year, and yet through all of that violence, the meat itself has almost never been the point. So today we're asking the real question. If humans were willing to hunt rhinos into near extinction, why did we never turn them into food? What is it about this animal that made it valuable enough to kill but somehow never valuable enough to eat? The answer involves biology, economics, and one of the strangest black markets on Earth. Let's start with the part of the rhino everyone already knows about, the horn. A rhino horn isn't bone, and it isn't ivory like an elephant's tusk. It's made almost entirely of keratin, the exact same protein that makes up your fingernails and hair. In raw biological terms, it's not much different from what's growing at the tips of your own fingers right now. And yet, on the black market, rhino horn has sold for prices exceeding $60,000 per kilogram. At various points, that has made it more valuable, gram for gram, than gold, than platinum, than cocaine on the street. Why? Mostly demand rooted in centuries-old traditional medicine beliefs in parts of Asia, where powdered rhino horn has been used, despite zero scientific evidence, as a treatment for everything from fevers to cancer. More recently, it's also become a status symbol, carved into ornamental objects and given as expensive gifts among wealthy buyers. Here's the part that matters for our question today. When a horn is worth more than the entire rest of the animal combined, poachers have exactly zero incentive to harvest the meat. Killing a rhino for its horn takes minutes. Butchering, transporting, refrigerating, and selling a 2-ton carcass of meat takes infrastructure, time, and enormous risk, all for a product worth a tiny fraction of what the horn alone brings in. So poachers do exactly what the economics tell them to do. They take the horn, they leave the body, which means from the very beginning, rhinos were never killed as a food source. They were killed as a resource extraction target, closer to mining than hunting. The meat was never the prize. It was just the leftover. Even if the horn economics didn't exist, there's a second problem. Rhinos are genuinely difficult, dangerous animals to be anywhere near. An adult white rhino can weigh over 5,000 pounds. Despite that size, they can charge at speeds close to 30 miles an hour, fast enough to outrun a human easily, and fast enough that most vehicles struggle to outrun one in rough terrain. Rhinos also have famously poor eyesight. A rhino can struggle to clearly make out a stationary person from as little as 30 feet away. That sounds like it should make them easier to avoid. In practice, it makes them more dangerous because a startled rhino with bad vision doesn't calmly assess a threat. It charges first and figures out what it hit later. Their horns aren't just decorative either. In a charge, a rhino can use that horn to gore, flip, and kill almost anything in its path, including full-grown lions that get too bold. Game rangers and conservationists working directly with rhinos follow extremely strict safety protocols, specifically because the animals are unpredictable even around humans who interact with them regularly. This is the first wall standing between rhinos and any kind of farming operation. You cannot herd an animal this size and this aggressive the way you herd cattle. You cannot build economical fencing that reliably contains an animal capable of ramming through most barriers without slowing down. Every part of working around rhinos requires expensive, specialized infrastructure. Armed rangers, reinforced enclosures, tranquilizer teams on permanent standby. None of that is cheap, and none of it scales the way a normal livestock operation needs to scale to be profitable. Let's say somehow you get past the danger problem. You build the perfect containment system, hire the perfect team, and manage to raise rhinos safely. There's a second wall waiting right behind it, and this one is entirely biological. A female rhino doesn't typically reach sexual maturity until she's around 5 to 7 years old. Pregnancy lasts between 15 and 16 months, well over a year of gestation for a single calf. After that, a mother rhino usually won't have another calf for another 2 to 4 years, since calves stay closely dependent on their mothers for an extended period. Compare that to cattle, which can begin reproducing around 15 months old and typically produce a calf every single year with proper management. Do the math across a farming timeline. A cattle operation can realistically double its herd in a handful of years. A rhino operation, even under perfect conditions, might take well over a decade to meaningfully grow its numbers. The turnover is simply too slow to support any kind of commercial meat industry. You'd be investing enormous amounts of money, time, and risk into an animal that gives you, at best, one very slow return every few years. Ranchers who have experimented with legal, regulated rhino farming in parts of southern Africa haven't done it for meat at all. They've done it exclusively for horn, because even with legal, sustainable horn harvesting, where the horn is carefully trimmed without harming the animal and regrows over time, the economics still only barely work. Nobody has ever seriously proposed farming rhinos for their meat because the math simply doesn't support it. Now, layer conservation status on top of everything we've covered, and the picture becomes even more serious. Of the 5 rhino species alive today, 3 are currently listed as critically endangered, the most severe category before extinction in the wild. The Javan rhino has an estimated wild population of fewer than 80 individuals left on the entire planet. The Sumatran rhino is down to somewhere around 40 to 80 individuals, and the northern white rhino subspecies is functionally extinct, with only 2 individuals left alive on Earth. Both female, meaning natural reproduction for that subspecies is no longer even biologically possible. Even the more stable species like the southern white rhino and the black rhino remain classified as near threatened or vulnerable, still recovering from decades of intense poaching pressure. This isn't a species with room to spare. Every single individual matters to conservationists trying to keep these populations from disappearing entirely. An animal in this position is about as far from a viable farmed food source as you can possibly get. Turning rhinos into livestock wouldn't just be economically difficult, it would actively work against decades of conservation effort trying to keep the species alive at all. International agreements like CITES place strict controls on any trade involving rhino products, specifically because the populations can't absorb additional commercial pressure. Legal protections exist precisely because the horn trade alone has already pushed multiple rhino species to the brink. Adding a legal meat industry on top of that would be almost unthinkable to any wildlife regulator on Earth. Here's a detail most people never think to ask about. What does rhino meat even taste like? And the honest answer is, almost nobody alive today actually knows because it's been eaten so rarely and so inconsistently throughout history. Historical accounts from hunters and explorers in the 19th and early 20th centuries occasionally describe rhino meat as tough, dense, and strongly gamey, closer in texture to old, heavily worked beef than anything tender. The animal's size and muscle structure make it naturally lean, but extremely fibrous, requiring long, slow cooking methods similar to how tougher cuts of wild game are typically prepared. In parts of Africa where rhino meat was occasionally eaten as bushmeat during the colonial hunting era, it was never treated as a delicacy. It was treated as whatever meat happened to be available after a hunt that was almost always motivated by trophy hunting or horn collection, not food. There's no established culinary tradition built around rhino meat anywhere in the world, no regional cuisine that developed techniques for preparing it well, and no consistent supply chain that would let chefs or communities refine recipes over generations the way we have with beef, pork, or chicken. Without demand, without tradition, and without a reliable supply, there was simply never a reason for anyone to solve the problem of making rhino meat taste good. Combine unappetizing texture with extreme scarcity, sky-high legal risk, and an animal that's actively being protected by armed rangers in most of its remaining habitat, and you end up with a food source that nobody has any real incentive to develop. Here's what makes the rhino story different from almost every other animal we don't eat. With elephants, humans mostly left them alone out of a mix of respect, danger, and economics. With hippos, an entire government nearly built a farming industry around them before science caught up and proved why it could never work. With rhinos, something darker happened. Humans didn't avoid rhinos out of caution or reverence. We hunted them anyway, just never for food. The horn alone was valuable enough to justify all the danger, all the cost, and all the legal risk, while the meat was treated as something not even worth the effort of taking home. In a strange way, that's almost worse than simply leaving the animal alone. Elephants earned a kind of unspoken protection through their memory, their intelligence, and their symbolism. Rhinos never got that same protection. extinction. They got hunted anyway for a body part made of the same material as your fingernails, while millions of pounds of meat were simply left behind to rot on the ground. The result today is 5 rhino species standing on the edge of extinction, not because humans wanted to eat them, and not because farming them for meat made any economic sense, but because a single carrot and horn convinced criminal networks it was worth risking everything for. So the next time someone assumes an endangered animal must be endangered because people wanted to eat it, remember the rhino. This is an animal that's been pushed to the brink of extinction almost entirely for a body part with zero proven medical value, made of the same protein sitting at the end of your own fingers right now. We never needed rhinos for food. We just decided a myth about their horn was worth more than the entire species surviving. Drop a comment and let me know. Did you know rhino horn was made of keratin before watching this? And what do you think it would actually take to stop the demand driving all of this? If this video changed the way you think about what drives extinction, hit subscribe, because the next story is just as unbelievable.